chatty. So if you do have any comments and questions, please pop them into the chat for us and we will address them at the end. Or if they're super interesting and or controversial, because we like that too, Sarah will read them out to us and flag us. So yeah, we do like to have a conversation more than anything. So we are really interested to hear your views and your challenges on where you are with coaching in your own business. I think that it is a topic that we all want to start having a look at. When we look at things like the big trends around employee experience, we're looking at things like diversity, equity, and inclusion. We're looking at things like wellness. All of these topics and all of these elements really start by looking at the beliefs and the value systems of our employees. And of course, to be in a mindset where you are coachable and where you are open to looking at alternative values and beliefs helps for these other big trends and topics to be embedded into your organization. So I think the benefits of coaching and having a coaching mindset are really far reaching in terms of the employee experience, which of course is what we at Talk are very passionate about and very interested in having conversations around. And of course, you know, how we do these things at scale, you know, that's the big conversation, I think, is, you know, it's very easy when you have a smallish team to be able to provide coaching, to be able to provide all of these different things for your employees. But when we start to look at organizations that have 20, 30, 40, 50,000 employees, how do we provide these experiences and how do we provide coaching and learning and upskilling? How do we provide these things at scale, even things like diversity? How do we look at that in terms of scale in organizations? So that's the conversation today. We're going to get kicking off. My name's Sally Acton, if you've never met me before, and I am the CEO of Talk Solutions. I'm joined today by three amazing humans who I've worked with over the years. Caroline is an executive coach and is going to be kicking us off this morning with a little bit more around coaching. Dwayne is from Massmart, and Dwayne heads up learning and development. He looks at behavioral changes and e-learning. And then Lauren is Lauren and I have worked together for many, many years. Lauren is a communication strategist and a coach herself, and she'll be talking to us a little bit more around some of the practical elements later in the day. So if everyone's here, let's get cracking. Before we start, I'm going to ask if we can kick off with a little bit of a poll. I'd like to know, in terms of your organization, where you are and where you are in coaching just generally. So if we can have a little look at that poll, and if I can ask everyone to kick off and give me your insights, that'll be super. And I'd like to have a look. So do you currently provide coaching in your organization? Let me know. Yes to some, not yet, but we want to, not at the moment. Those are your options. Let me know where you are as an organization. Okay, so yes to some seems to be the main answer at the moment. Well, that's good. I mean, you know, I think coaching is good, even if it's only for some. Yes to everyone. That's great. And other people just starting that journey. Okay, super. Thank you. All right, great. We're going to get started then. Caroline, over to you. As I mentioned, Caroline is an executive coach. Caroline, can you kick us off with letting us know a little bit more about coaching?
Sure, I'm very happy to do that. And maybe what I'll do is start with a little bit of a story, Sally. But first of all, I need to apologize. Just as you were starting there, load shedding hit, so I was thrown into darkness and had to click over to see the light again. Yeah, so first of all, my story around coaching and why I believe in it so fundamentally is I'm a numbers girl by profession. I studied finance and ended up in corporate strategy and worked in corporate strategy for many, many years. And earlier in my career, if you had asked me about coaching, I would have told you that I didn't necessarily believe in it per se. I'd had two not so great experiences with coaches. But through my career and through my own evolution, I realized that, you can have all the numbers in place and you can have the best laid plans, but they amount to nothing without the quality of the people who get behind those plans and deliver on them. And so I became a convert. And now I'd much rather focus on the people and equipping the people, because they then in turn help facilitate and deliver on the plans. And subsequently, having done my own, or been on my own coaching journey, and now coaching leaders and teams, I really believe that through quality coaching and the commitment to coaching and the mindset that comes through a coaching journey, you can really equip people with skills, with knowledge, with autonomy to take control of their own learning and their own development. And that is remarkable, because in time, you just see that personal growth and the commitment to people's futures, which of course enables business. Having said that, I really, really do believe that the quality of the coaching is important. And I think that when we talk about the democratization of coaching, this is where I think we get to the nuts and the bolts, is how do we democratize coaching, but in a way that we effectively equip people with the right skills to be able to coach, and peers to coach one another. Because when we get that right, we fundamentally shift that performance, but also culture and ability as well. And on that slide, I mean, there's a great quote by Confucius that said, "Tell me and I'll forget, show me and I may remember, involve me and I will understand." And I think that's the beauty of coaching, is coaching, because it is, I mean, the coach basically just acts as a vehicle, a conduit through which the person understands and develops themselves, almost, because we believe that the person has their own answers and we just guide people towards that. But when we get people involved in that process, the power of coaching is amazing. And so simply, coaching is just that. It's a mechanism to improve performance, but it's a win-win. So when we effectively coach people, and people start to develop themselves, business benefits as well. And therein, I think, lies the ROI for business.
And Caroline, coaching's had a bit of a bad rep, or almost seen as quite sort of exclusive. I mean, what in your experiences are some of the negative mindsets or negative connotations associated to coaching?
There's a number of reasons why coaching has developed a bit of a bad rep. It's first of all, it's a sort of unregulated industry. Pretty much anybody can become a coach. In my experience, I've had sort of 23-year-olds come and call themselves life coaches and be coaches. But I think everybody's got something to contribute in a way. It's how we market coaching and what people can contribute to coaching. But as a profession, I think the fact that it's somewhat unregulated definitely does impact the quality of coaching a little bit. The other thing is, for people who become career coaches, that's your living, it's your bread and butter, which means that you've got to do enough coaching to actually make a living out of it. And that is difficult. So rates are high. If you are a career coach, the rates are, they're prohibitive to making it freely available to all levels of an organization. And so that's probably one of the biggest issues around, making coaching more accessible. And I think, the other thing around coaching, as I said, in my early career, I had 2 bad experiences, but I think that's because coaching is largely misunderstood, and what people contribute to coaching can sometimes be misunderstood. And so the relationship between a coach and the person that they're coaching, who we call the coachee, is absolutely imperative. There has to be quality of relationship. There has to be trust. They've got to be able to have open, frank, honest conversations. There has to be integrity and confidentiality. And when those things are missing, especially that chemistry and that connection, it hampers the coaching experience. There's a lot as well, myself, I was a cynic for a long time. And you get people like that as well. A lot of people are cynical around what can I actually benefit from this coaching experience. And so we need to shift, first of all, the mindset towards coaching and get people to understand, the role of coaching and what it should facilitate. But we also need to shift the mindset of coaches and the professionalism of coaches towards that coaching relationship and how they engage around it. It's very easy to walk into a coaching session completely unprepared, but you're not going to add value. So there's a lot that needs to go into developing coaches and developing the mindset around coaching, creating awareness amongst the coachees around what they can expect and what they must hold coaches accountable for. And then, of course, we need to make it more accessible by mitigating costs, etc.
I think what you said there around the trust and relationship building, is so great to also consider, in terms of a lot of employee experience and in terms of looking at how organizations can start to achieve much more just even outside the realms of coaching, establishing that chemistry, that trust, that conversation is definitely going to be a spin-off of bringing a coaching mindset into the business, because people are going to have to communicate more with each other, build those relationships, build that trust, build that empathy. I think that's something that is a definite spin-off and an advantage if we look at looking at scaling up. So, in terms of looking at the traditional model, would you say it's always been stuck at top tier purely from a cost perspective, or is there something more to that?
I think organizations naturally want to empower their people. They want to equip their people with skills, and that's across the board, right? We want to develop all our people generally, but there has been a natural bias towards top tiers. How do we develop executives? How do we develop senior leaders? And there's nothing wrong with that. We do need to develop our people, but that bias, I think, is one like most other biases. We've just never questioned it. And so what we're seeing in organizations is there's a big move towards leader as coach, but it's predominantly performance focused. So why would we want to coach our people? We would want to coach them around their performance, not necessarily around their development. So we coach towards performance and not around the whole person. And I think that's the shift. And part of that does depend on top tiers and shifting the role of leaders. And that can be done through coaching. But I think that there needs to be a more systemic approach to development. And that coaching, when we coach executives, we coach the whole person. So we coach them at a very personal level, because a lot of the time the challenges they bring to the table have a personal nature. We coach them for development, we coach them for performance, but at the lower tiers, we tend to coach purely for performance. And I think that that's the opportunity. If we shift that mindset, we can make a massive change. And so I do think, traditionally it has been aimed at top tiers, and that is most likely because of the cost involved and the accessibility of coaches that can coach at that level. But it's definitely an opportunity to shake that model.
Okay, and I agree. Looking at the whole person is absolutely imperative. Where somebody is, you can't separate part of you out and just leave a little a little part behind. You know, if you're not having a great time at home, if you're struggling with your partner, if you're struggling with family, if you're struggling with financial issues, all of that tips over into your work. So, you know, to start to bring about that mind shift to say, you know, when I'm coaching the entire person, or I'm working with my entire, you know, my entire employee. That, I think that immediately creates a lot of change. So Caroline, in your opinion, what can we do about this? How can we move things forward a little bit?
I think that there's a lot that we can do, Sally. I think, you know, the model of leader of coach works. It's there. I think it's how we equip leaders with the real skills around coaching. What does it mean to coach? You know, it's not just around a framework. We generally tend to give people just a framework, you know, like the GROW model, and says, off you go and coach, sample of questions. For me, it's not about that per se. You know, if you're going to be an effective coach, it actually requires a massive amount of personal reflection and shifting yourself in order to effectively coach. So I think the leader of coach model works insofar as we equip people effectively, which is possibly a bit deeper than just a traditional leader as coach model. One of the clients that I currently work with, they have actually equipped internal coaches within their L&D environment, where those people are qualified coaches. So they've been through an external coaching journey, and they coach into the business, and that's hugely effective. But of course, they have limited capacity as well. So that proves a little bit of a challenge. But I think if we can do that, if organizations do have the capacity and the resources to equip internal coaches, people who could be more available into the organization, they obviously don't bring the neutrality that an external person would bring into the conversation. But I do believe that there's an opportunity for that. As I say, you know, effectively to work with the leader as coach. But what I've also started to see is there's a massive shift towards peer coaching and group coaching. And again, it requires us to upskill people within the organization with some coaching knowledge. What does it mean to coach? But then actually getting and creating peer coaching circles, which what I love is you almost establish that coaching circle for a period of 12 months. And those people meet regularly and they hold one another accountable. But they can bring their challenges and their concerns that they're dealing with into the circle, and the circle can coach them, which is a lovely framework, you know, that idea of peer coaching. What you're also doing in establishing some of these simple mechanisms is you're changing the culture. So you're changing the culture simultaneously to being one of a coaching style culture, but you're also improving performance, because as peers, we become accountable for one another. What is lovely around this concept is you cannot separate culture. You know, in all of what we do in the organization, and I'm a firm believer, you'll know, Sally, in psychological safety and creating environments that support the whole person, where people can show up authentically. And if we create that environment through effective leader as coach, through peer coaching circles, we can actually create an environment that naturally fosters greater inclusivity, that naturally fosters an environment that allows people to show up authentically, to present their mistakes, to present their challenges without judgment. And so what we start to see through that is we start to see more compassion, more kindness, a greater understanding of people and their contribution. And we see people grow and develop through that. And with all of that, engagement just soars. So we start to see improved engagement, we start to see improved performance. So it's a little bit like a chicken and an egg. If we start to change fundamental practices, all the stuff that we measure, the engagement of our people, the performance of our people, will naturally improve.
Thanks, Caroline. I love that peer coaching. I mean, I wonder if there's a kind of a spin-off employee resource groups, if we could start to look to coaching resource groups as a spin-off. Dwayne, I'm going to hand over to you. I mean, I know you've had an incredible amount of experience in this, in some of your previous roles. Do you want to take us a little bit through your thoughts?
Oh, sure. I think, thanks, Sally. And Caroline is on the money. You know, there's a couple of options that any organization can employ. One of it that we look at, and there's also a number of complexities as well. You know, it becomes difficult. If I think of the organization I'm currently in and my previous organization, both organizations have 35,000 plus globally positioned throughout. You know, my last organization was over 16 countries. Here at Massmart, we across Africa. It becomes incredibly challenging then to get the traditional ICF accredited coaches and deploy these folks across the organization. Yes, of course. And leader as coach does have limitations, but it also does work. So there are options available to support you. The right thing first and foremost is, as Caroline said, is you need to identify the right people. It's not simply employing folks. Yes, you know, often in my role as head of leadership development, I get the question, what is a leader accountable for? Now, I worked with Dr. Morne Buchne since immigrated, and he used to have this lovely yellow book with about 500 pages in. And he said, well, that's what a leader is accountable for. It's a massive textbook of the different jobs that we have to do as leaders, right? We have to be empathetic, we have to show up, we have to inspire, we have to drive performance, we have to drive development. But I also worked with a leader who summarized it in 3 simple points that stuck with me. As leaders, we're responsible for managing the financial assets, so the P&L and the financial position of organizations, the business assets, whatever those might be, could be plants, factories, DCs, and then most importantly, our people, our human assets. And when you look at what is the responsibility of leaders as you know, in that sphere, it's how do we attract, grow, and retain the best talent, all of which can be supported by coaching. So when we look at the leader as coach as a potential option, one, you have to have the right leader, the leader that believes that this is not only a duty for KPIs to get me my performance review or my rating, but I genuinely believe in increasing the performance, but also increasing the capability of associates. So when we look at the leader as coach, it's about how do I foster and instill a growth mindset in my people? Because that's ultimately what we're trying to do. We're having a conversation with staff around, we believe there's potential within you, whether you're aware of it or not. Sometimes that's the other thing, right? We have folks that don't understand the potential that lies within them. It's untapped potential. And so we start off with that conversation to understand, are you willing to go on the road? You can't force somebody if they're not willing. You have to have a willing, able, inspired individual to participate in the leader as coach. And what makes it, you know, in my experience, work is the fact that learning still happens on the old traditional 70-20-10 model. Learning still happens predominantly where? In the workplace, right? When we go through those roles, those new challenges, those stretch assignments, those opportunities for us to think differently, that's where learning happens. And it's not just in the workplace. I mean, you can take this example and you can apply it anywhere with your family at home, your own learning. My wife will tell you, Dwayne learns after the 7th time when he's broken the washing machine that, okay, I should put this little cog back where it belongs. That's learning on the job, right? So that's a practical example. And so when we apply that principle, it's how do we create that growth mindset, but at the same time also to the psychological safety that you touched on, create an environment in which we say it's okay to fail, but fail forward. So fail with the notion that I fail on my first or second attempt, but ever so much I'm getting closer to achieving the objective that I've outlined. So when we are acting as leader, as coach, it's about recalibrating and ensuring that your associate or your employee, your team member, whoever they may be, understands where are the shortcomings and what is the opportunities to move forward. 20% is learning through others. And that's where, you know, Caroline also touched on another lever that we've been successful in pulling. It's that peer-to-peer coaching groups, coaching circles, etc. Because there's a number of benefits that come with that. One, you start to foster diverse thinking. I sit in a room with Lauren and with Sally and with Caroline, and you know, Sally, she is an example of a challenge and also a different way that she's approached it, a different mind, how she's challenged herself and different thinking that I might not have thought about. But I also get the assurance that whilst we may be in different boats, we're still in the same sea. In other words, we are sharing this challenge, and collectively, how can we address this challenge? If you're familiar with Liz Wiseman's work, she talks about multipliers. And in multipliers, it's also about leaders recognizing I don't own the problem myself, but I start to leverage the knowledge within my team. and bring their best self to work so that they can contribute to that challenge. So those are some of the benefits you start to reap when you look at doing coaching circles, and it depends how you set it up. If it's an intact team, if it's a group of peers, there's different mechanisms to it, but it's no doubt successful. I think what's also important, and again, the GROW model is not bulletproof, but it reminds us, I think of Dr. Mark Kahn's work. I had the privilege of meeting him one day. He authored a book called Coaching on the Axis, which speaks about a duality that sits, the duality of complexity between what the organization requires and the individual need, because there's both. I need to improve the associate, and that means I need to understand their personal development matters, but at the same time, I need to also recognize what is the organization's strategy, what is the organization's need for the future. And so it's not simply, Caroline's very right, it's not simply saying, here's the GROW model, all the best. But you need leaders who have those skills and capabilities to host that conversation, Sally, to be able to understand what is the goal of the individual, but more so, does that align with what the organization requires?
Yeah.
Because sometimes, Sally, you might tell me I want to become a chef, and I'm like, that's great, but I work in an energy and chemicals business, so unless you're changing that to become an aeronautical engineer, it's a misfit. So we have to create in those conversations.
Okay, and I mean, we're talking about this now and saying, all right, looking at scale, what do managers need to do to be able to accomplish this? How are we going to now actually get this to practically work in a large organization?
Sure. So before I get to the skills, I just want to reiterate what Caroline has shared, because I think it's important. You have to have the right managers. It's not about your job says you need to coach, and so you coach.
Yeah.
Some things are difficult. When we look at having conversations around even diversity and equity, that's a topic at the moment. It's not simply put you a line manager, it's your job. You might really have your own opinion. When it comes to developing people, you might also not be the best person suited to developing people because you might have your own complexities within. I've sat with leaders that tell me, Dwayne, I'm not interested in developing Lauren. The organization's not invested in me, and I'm carrying all this baggage. And so why should I? You have to first and foremost, I think, identify the right people. Yeah. And many times, if you ask the organization, you'll find people will raise their hand. Actually, I want to participate. I want to contribute. I want to develop. So that's the first thing. You need a willingness. Secondly, you need to understand that it's about commitment to talent development. Absolutely not about performance management. This is not an opportunity to bring along your black book and say, well, through my coaching sessions, there's all the things that I identified will help me to move your merit rating from exceptional performance to not meeting expectations. That's not the idea. The idea in coaching is solely around, and that's why when we employ coaches, if we use external service providers, we always put it in the blanket of confidentiality. What happens in those conversations, we do not need to know the detail as leadership development gurus. What we do need to know is when do we need to support you and how do we unveil some of the things and remove the roadblocks that are in your way. But it's about commitment to talent development. You need leaders that can listen, and not listen to respond, but listen to understand. As leaders, our job's very simple. We are there to support our associates. We are there to allow our employees to bring their best selves to work. And so for us to understand what is hindering you from reaching that level of greatness of performance and untapping your potential, we need to thoroughly understand where are our associates as individuals, whether it's challenges at work, challenges at home, but that listening capability. And with that, it's linked to empathy. We already know we are all going through the most at the moment. We had a chat earlier, whether it's ESCOM or whether it's the freezing weather, or whether it's just trying to figure out how am I going to fill my fuel, my tank of fuel to get to work. Every single person at the moment is going through a bunch of stuff. And leaders need to be empathetic to that. You can't push your agenda to get that performance until you understand what is the inhibitor to the performance, what is hindering those folks. And then we are all responsible for creating inclusivity, an enabling environment, an environment where everybody can. You can't gear up. There's a saying that says the opportunity of a lifetime can only be taken during the lifetime of the opportunity. And another way of looking at it through the lens that I cannot create potential, but then hinder the opportunity for the potential to be brought to the workplace. And so when we talk about an inclusive and enabling environment, yes, there's the straightforward diversity and managing, gender and race and all those beautiful things, but it's also diversity of thinking and experience. That in any organization, there should be a place for everybody. And we need leaders that allow and enable that. It's not just tolerate. Sometimes I see the word tolerate and I get upset. I tolerate when my 1-year-old puts my TV on and off the whole night. But we are not looking at tolerance here. We are looking at encouraging diversity and driving that enabling workplace. We also need leaders to evaluate some of the processes, because often I've engaged with leaders that point out there's a problem with that individual. No, sir, there's a problem with the process. Or there's maybe a challenge. I've seen systems that are developed and systems are not systems working for people. I start to ask the question, well, why the heck did we bring this into the organization in the first place? So as leaders, we need to, yes, listen and be empathetic and be committed to developing people, and that's looking at the people aspect, but we also need to look at the environmental factors. Is the environment enabling? Is the environment diverse? Do we have processes that are efficient and ways of work that support that high potential enablement of our associates? And if they don't, then Sally, it's simple. As leaders, that's where our job comes. That's where we start rolling up the sleeves and getting a little bit dirty and saying, well, I need to ask, why is it that we are still continuing in a way that's not efficient? Because that is also a big inhibitor to performance as well.
Yeah, I love that. And I think, I know Lauren's going to speak to it a little bit later, but, I think at Talk as well, everything that we build from an employee experience perspective, we always look at it and say, and the same with coaching, it has to be a habit. It has to be something that is built into the day-to-day for it to become sustainable. But a habit will fail without the systems that support it. And I think exactly as you're saying, the responsibility of the organization sits with building those systems and processes to be able to have the habit of coaching in the business. Is there time set aside for it? Is it built into the traditional KPIs? Is it built into the ways that we're engaging every morning? I know Lauren's going to talk about it, so I don't want to get too much into that now. I'm going to ask quickly if everyone can reflect a little bit on what Dwayne said and let us know via our second poll. Listening to that, do you think that in your organization at the moment that coaching is achievable if you consider the systems and processes and the way that your organization is set up currently? Do you think it's achievable in your business? Let us know in the poll. Yes, that's a resounding. I'm not sure. Okay. But I'm not sure is not a no. All right, let's have a look. Okay, so most people think that coaching at scale is achievable within their business at the moment, which I think is really positive. And I think that's showing that there's also a willingness to look and evaluate the systems. Lauren, I'm gonna ask you to come in and comment this. I know habits and systems are some of your favorite things, like little brown packages tied up in string.
We're not going to tell that story. So I just wanted to say, wow, I'm quite mind blown already, Dwayne. That was an amazing talk. I'm sitting here and I'm taking notes and I'm feeling like, I should just be listening and not doing too much talking. And Caroline, also so many very valuable points that you raised there. And I think from Sally's mentioned, we've worked together for an age now, and a lot of what we do is around developing content. And I think the thing that interests us both so much is now in this bigger coaching conversation, how do we take all of that information, all of those insights, and develop something that can work in the digital space? So how do all of these things like listening translate? How does enablement translate in a digital space? How does psychological safety translate? And I think working with Talk, we do things quite differently in that we approach it as marketers. We have a stronghold of marketing automation and the capabilities of what systems can do, digital, like software systems. And then when you pair that with powerful content that can be delivered to people remotely, anywhere and everywhere, across various channels, you start getting the information out. And then on the reverse side of that, How do you turn it around? And as a business, start listening also. So we've worked together, we've worked on massive implementations of digital portals that are gamified and full of beautiful content and highly engaging, that can reach out to people across SMS, app notifications, and then the thinking is, how do we craft that story? So it's always about coming back for us to the data. What is the data saying? So this is where we need to get really smart. We need to get really lean about how we develop these strategies. And kind of taking a step back and looking at the democratization of coaching as an idea, we see companies like BetterUp, we see companies like CareerPoint, and very recently I came across Hello Coach. That's a local company that have developed a coaching app that can, I don't know if anyone has seen it. I just saw it last week and I was like, wow, this is amazing. So I learned once when I was working in the trend space that if you notice something 3 times, it's a trend. So spot on, Sal, you're right on the money with this one, to borrow a phrase from Dwayne. And I know you, Sal, this is something that you have been passionately invested in for so long. It's about how do we empower frontline workers who don't necessarily have access to email, and as Dwayne says, are dealing with the most right now. How do we effectively help that person? How do we effectively serve that person? And how do we reach them in a way that is authentic, that will move them in terms of behavior shift or mindset shift, and a lot of where we come from in terms of thinking like marketers is around, who's my audience? How can I speak to them in what, and not just languages, we have 11 official languages, but what are the kind of words that will reach a person? What is the kind of tone I need to strike to talk to someone that will help them to listen? And, we address a lot of what we do through the appreciative inquiry lens, saying, how can I ask this question in a way that won't clog people up and will help them to reconsider how they think about something, or reconsider how they do something every day? How do we shift behaviors and habits in a microcosmic way, Because I think that's important. And Sal, I know that you are also extremely passionate about habit creation. In fact, I don't know if anyone's come across an app called Fabulous. I like the name of it. And, there are a lot of tools and things available today that can help people change their habits in micro ways. Some of you may have read the Tiny Habits book. And I think what's interesting about that is behavior can be designed according to the theory of tiny habits. And behavior is very much an intersection of, it's a formula, essentially. It's a formula of the moment that motivation meets ability, meets prompt, is the moment a behavior happens. So once you start thinking like a scientist, what are the kind of things that you can put in place digitally? The prompts, for example, an app notification at the exact right time. If you know that your employee is in crisis, how can you reach out and help that person in that moment of crisis? So, for example, we have a tool that can analyze sentiment across an organization, and people are encouraged to check in weekly. How are you feeling this week? I'm feeling good. I'm feeling anxious. Now, if someone keeps saying that they're feeling anxious, what is the automation that you can trigger at that point to assist that person to reach out to their wellness program for help, because we know that this person is now suffering anxiety 3 weeks in a row. How can we reach out and just remind that person, these are the contact details. This is who you need to talk to. This is free to you, you know? So it's also about supporting people in that moment. And, you know, besides crisis communications, which the automation can work in so well, we develop these layered communication approaches, strategies. So how can we step back and look at say, for example, a health and wellness campaign? Of course, when we're thinking about coaching, we're thinking about not just leadership coaching, we're thinking also about health coaching, for example, or mental wellness coaching, you know, and creating that, coming back to that idea of the whole employee. How do we support the whole employee in creating this coaching content? So I think it's so important to start with, see it as a communication strategy, and start with some kind of teaser approach. Where are these people? What kind of channels will reach our employee? So app notification, is an app notification, is it an SMS, is it possibly a USSD channel that could reach this person? Does everybody have an email address? Like, how familiar as people professionals are we with our database? Do we know how people are logging in? Do we know how often they're logging into our intranet or our portal or our system? And are we analyzing those results? Are we constantly trying to improve those results? So I have a whole lot of notes that I'd wanted to talk to, which I've kind of gone sidetracked off. Coaching is really about an attitude. So how do we impart that attitude in the content that we're creating to create the empowerment and enablement that people need?
So
I've already spoken.
If I'm looking at that, you're saying that really that there's a kind of a two-pronged approach here. So we're looking at the mindset of leaders. We're looking at the way that that the business is enabling the habits and systems. And then we're saying, as a business, we've decided that this is something that we're going to go for. How do we now build that into our communications at all different levels? And how do we serve those agreed for sort of points and prompts to our employees to actually start reminding them of what they've learned from potentially their manager or their leader? And how do we now actually implement that on the day-to-day? And that's where the content and the prompts are coming in to serve the employee.
Yeah, I think it's really about that. What does that journey look like? You know, so where is our person right now, and where do we want to take them, and how are we going to get them there? Knowing that, you know, we spoke a little bit earlier about coachability.
Yes.
So is the person that we're reaching out to, are they even coachable? You know, how do we start making them aware of the profound benefits that can be, you know, that can be accessed? And, you know, if someone is coachable, like at what stage of their journey are they, and how can we reach them where they are at that moment, with the right content that can shift that behavior, you know? And of course, that all needs to line up with the business strategy. And as Caroline mentioned so succinctly, that it's a win-win. The moment we start empowering people and developing people, the business is lined up to succeed. And, you know, the coaching content, I say the word coaching content, but what is coaching content? You know, how is it what is that message? And I think to understand what your message is, you need to know exactly who your audience is. And even in an organization, think about, for example, a Massmart, 35,000 people, Dwayne, you mentioned, and you have your leadership band, and you have your upper management band, and you've got your managers, and then you've got your people who are working in retail. They're working in the stores. They don't necessarily have an email address. The type of messages that are going to those different bands of people will be different, because they have very different environmental issues that they're facing. Like what do their day-to-day issues look like, and how can we start supporting those people through the type of content. And we talk a lot about digital, but there is also a lot of space for print media, especially in store. And how can we use digital tools like QR codes, for example, to bring people back into our digital space? And then once they're in that digital space, what does that psychological safety look and feel like? And how do we keep supporting it? How do we create listening in a digital environment? What does listening, I want to say look like, but it should say sound like, I guess. And it's about responsiveness. It's actually about the organization and the leadership investing in those spaces and opening up that channel for communications, not to be just a broadcast, but to be a two-way conversation. And I know that's one of talk's major compass indicators. Conversation is key. That's one of the pillars. And it's all well and good to put content out, but what happens when you put diversity, equity, and inclusion content out into your organization? You need to be prepared for conversation to happen. And it's not always going to be easy conversation. In fact, it's more likely going to be difficult conversation. And then how do you support difficult conversation? How are you thinking about that next step? What does someone do once they're sitting with racial hurt, and as an organization you are saying, you may be talking about racial tolerance. That's Dwayne's most unfavorite word, or and it's stirring things in me personally. How are you getting your digital journey to intersect back with that person and say, speak to someone, talk to this person. This is the avenue to take this conversation. This is the forum. So what do those forums look like? And that kind of then moves into the peer-to-peer space. How can peers now start to support each other? And I love that. And I think it's something that I don't potentially think about enough. And that's definitely a beautiful avenue for coaching to happen. I think you can only facilitate so much kind of from the business to the person before someone just wants to reach out to a friend and say, like, I've got this stuff on my mind. Is this happening for me? Is it happening for you? And then how do you support those conversations too? What we've seen a massive uptake with content the moment digital portals become data free. So when we're talking about leadership investment, like how far can leaders go to create these open, free, safe environments for people to start having these conversations, especially now post-COVID, where people are more and more cut off and people more and more need community to come back to. So how do we create these second places in work where people know that this is somewhere that they belong, and this is somewhere where they can use their voice and speak their truth, and it's allowed and it's supported. And and once you start getting this right as a business, because the stories that start coming out of, we ran, I think in the last couple of years, we ran some financial coaching content, and we opened up a storytelling mechanism inside the system, and people started coming back with the most beautiful stories of saying, that I've been reading this content for years, and I decided to put this savings plan in place, and I've saved enough money to send my child to university this year. And that's the kind of stuff that just like, whoa, it's working, and that's powerful.
Agreed.
And that's amazing.
I think Dwayne's got something he wants to add on this. Dwayne?
Yeah, so I just wanted to hop in there, Lauren. I think we also need to, there's a big advantage and there's big advantages and benefits when you start marrying technology and some of the coaching practices. So, I mean, a typical example, we spoke about the GROW model earlier. It's not something, yes, you plug and play and off you go, but here's an opportunity to also understand where your people at. Some organizations are in very difficult circumstances at the moment. But when you look at the principles of understanding what is the goal, ensuring there's a common goal, using systems to capture that data around what is the reality. The old saying, we're in the same storm, but we're in very different boats or very different ships. You start to see that. I mean, within MassMart, we were looking at the different banners we've got. Builders, Game, and Macro belong to one company, but they're on the 7 seas at the moment. But there's some commonality that, through the right systems and techniques, and that's where I think talk comes into, you come into your fore there, you start to get an understanding of really what is the reality of our people at large. What are the opportunities that we've got? I think that's the other thing. When you start coaching and you get to the right level of coaching, the problem solving then shifts from just leaders to collective understanding. And I think that's where we move on to the next principle about what are the opportunities for us. And lastly, what is the willingness? I think sometimes we overlook that. We as leaders impose upon. So there's an opportunity to bring that technology, gathering that data. You spoke about data, Lauren. Data speaks. When you know what the folks' reality is, you know what the opportunities are. You might not know an opportunity as a leader sitting here in the fancy head office to restore a game store in the middle of Timbuktu to its former glory. How do you manage that? And then also understanding what your people are willing to do informs your strategy. So I just wanted to contribute that, Sally, that the two marry quite well together as well.
No, they definitely do. And I think that's so important is exactly that, is to target that listening. And again, our questions are fateful. So, the questions that we ask are going to determine, who is willing, who is open. And that goes not only to being coachable, but also to the earlier points of who wants to step up and take this on, and who wants to be part of the development of others within the business. And I think that that's such great opportunity. And I think it's such a great metric as well to have a look at from a leadership perspective, to say people that are stepping up and willing to develop others are often people, in my opinion, that you should be looking at and earmarking for, further investment as an organization, because, you can't just always look and make the best salesperson the head of sales, or the head of the best dev the head of tech. Sometimes it's the person that stands up that says, I want to develop others. That is where we should be looking for leadership. So I'm going to ask Sarah if we've got any questions that have come up so far in our chat. Or if we have any questions, please drop them into the chat, and let's have a look if we've got anything for our panelists to ask. Sarah, have we got any questions that we need to answer?
Thanks, Sally. There are no specific questions at this point. I don't know if people still want to pop in. There were just really a couple of comments. Joyce just made a comment when Dwayne was talking regarding a great book. I think it was referring to the book, I can't remember the author's name, but Coaching on an Axis, or From an Axis. And then Brian mentioned a book by James Clear on atomic habits, which is when Lauren was talking more around the science of behavior. So those are just sort of two comments that have come in. There we go. Dwayne said Coaching on the Axis by Dr. Mark Kahn. That's the book that Joyce was commenting on. So she's obviously read that and also thinks it's really good, but no questions at this point. So,
I'd love to ask a question if to our audience, if that's possible. I'd love to know what kind of specific challenges people in the people space are having right now with getting their content, getting their coaching content, if that's something that they're doing to their people.
Yeah, I think that's a very valid question. I think as well that, you know, one of the big things that I see in conversation with people around the topic of coaching is a sense of overwhelm, that the subject seems too big, that it seems too difficult, and that the scale is intimidating when we look at that. And I think one of the things that we've seen in my experience is just start. Just a little bit, start with one small thing, start with asking the questions, start with listening and asking, you know, even just setting some common language around what is the difference between being developed as a person and being coachable, as opposed to, you know, just traditional learning. I don't know, Dwayne, if you've got a comment on that, but I think often people don't know the difference between being coached and being taught. So what do you think about setting common language around that?
No, you're very right, Sally. I think, you know, we have a challenge. We're an organization with over 400 stores. You know, it's not easy to just, Lauren, deploy emails and get the communication out there. People come back to us, and one of the things they share is the difficulty on time. I'm on the shop floor. Where will I have time? And I think what's important, and this is where leader as coach does work, is that coaching is not a standalone event. You know, we don't set aside time from 1 to 2, and I will coach Sally between 1 and 2. Yes, there is, as Caroline said, the formal executive coaching that takes place. An ICF accredited coach, that is a different, that is a very specific type of coaching. And obviously that reaps big benefits. But organizations, like you say, Sally, can just start. Just on the job. If you walk the floor and you see there's an opportunity for improvement or a new way, or, you know, you can challenge one of your associates. That's where you have the conversation. I mean, I challenged my team on e-learning. We had 19,000 programs from January to June last year. We sat together in a hub. We've got 78,000 for the same year to date. And that's through on-the-job discussions, coaching, listening to their challenges, understanding where they are. So I think you have to apply the right coaching at the right time. There's a place for formal executive coaching, but also there's opportunities daily for us as leaders to coach our associates to become strong at what they do.
If I can add, Dwayne, earlier we spoke about the difference between mentoring and coaching. If you develop a culture of coaching, then mentoring, which is actually the provision of content, you know, when you're mentoring, you're telling people things in a coaching style. So you're sharing your insights, your learning, where coaching itself is actually more around the asking of the questions and getting people to seek their own answers. So yes, it's about guiding, and yes, you can share some of your knowledge, but that's not what coaching is about. And so we do need to differentiate between the coaching and the mentoring. And I think more importantly is focusing on developing a culture of coaching so that people actively go and ask for, you know, can you help me? Can you support me? Because it makes it safe for people to ask that. You know, very often depending on the culture in your organization, if I ask for help, it's frowned on. And so we have to fundamentally shift that. And if I can just add one last comment on what Lauren spoke about, you know, we need to think differently around how we utilize technology. Technology is an enabler. So we can create wonderful content, but we can also use it as a place to connect people. So you spoke about some of the coaching technologies that are out there, Lauren, but we can create technology like that in organizations where people who are keen to coach internal to an organization can actually register as coaches. And in the same way, people can access those people from a mentorship and a coaching perspective. And I think therein lies a massive opportunity from a democratization of coaching perspective.
Absolutely. And I think we definitely do have a lot of, you know, we have the economy now of sharing content that's so, you know, that's user generated. So we do have that creator economy going. There is the ability to share what we've learned and people stepping up. I know that Joyce did make a comment that was very similar along that line that you just spoke to, Caroline, around changing the culture. So thank you for that. We have unfortunately run out of time, but thank you so much to all of you for sharing your views and sharing your great experience and expertise with us. We really appreciate it. We will make the recording available to everybody. And thank you so much. I really appreciate it. And looking forward to seeing a lot more coaching mindsets out there in the workplace. So thank you and enjoy the rest of your day. May ESCOM keep your lights on.
Thanks, Sally. Thanks to you.
Good.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you, everybody.
everyone.